Savior, conqueror, hero, villain. You are all things, Revan, and yet you are nothing. In the end, you belong to neither the light nor the darkness. You will forever stand alone.
Who was Revan? Malik believed him to have many titles, and not even writers of the character or lore seemed to agree on how he was to be interpreted. But that's a major reason why I am so happy to be returning to my series on character analysis. In this episode of Decoded, we will attempt to uncover the mystery that is Revan. Revan is not an easy character to analyze. This is in many ways due to his unknown origins. To get the best idea of who Revan was, we have to start from the beginning, which takes us from the pre-KOTOR 1 history to the conclusion of KOTOR 2. Revan is of course the name that we know quote-unquote Revan by. His real name is unknown to us, as is his planet of origin. We know that he's from the Outer Rim, born sometime near 3994 BBY, which is around 341 years before the Treaty of Coruscant, which is essentially the plot of SWTOR, or at least the start of the plot. We know at a young age that Revan of course was Force sensitive. This meant that he joined the Jedi at a fairly young age. This is also where he befriended another young Jedi, Alec. Alec would of course prove to be a very key character in Revan's future life. Revan had an unwavering thirst for knowledge, which inevitably meant power too. In some circles, this thirst would be fed. It would be considered a positive quality, a student eager to learn more and more. In the Jedi Order, however, some of his masters, including Vandar and Vrook, were not very fond of his desires. They made it a point to keep an eye on Revan. Revan wasn't without a good mentor, however. Revan had a favorite teacher, Kreia, or as some assume her to be, RNK. Kreia very much appreciated Revan. His thirst for knowledge matched her thirst for knowledge, and Kreia's unorthodox teaching methods made for an interesting pairing between the two. It allowed both the important opportunity to further each other's beliefs that weren't so different from one another. These beliefs made them outcasts among other Jedi, but it made their bond that much stronger. Everything changed for Revan when the Mandalorians attacked. The Mandalorians started by attacking Outer Rim cities, and not just attacking, but brutally massacring the populations and even turning a planet to glass. Revan, having a connection to the Outer Rim, was outraged, especially because the Council was urging caution. Revan and his friend Alec, however, were not having this.
Two Jedi Knights, Revan and Malak, defied the Jedi Council. They challenged the Mandalorian fierceness and brutality on the battlefield with a viciousness of their own.
Revan stressed that they couldn't sit by and just let planets be destroyed by the Mandalorians. The Republic, already involved in the war, was not doing well defending from the invasion. Revan and Alec felt forced to take action, and take action they did. Revan was able to convince the Council to allow him to intervene by resurrecting an old Merc Corp in which Jedi were deputized by the Republic to serve as healers of sorts. This allowed Revan and his followers to finally join in on the fight. The Council reluctantly agreed. Joining the fight, Revan and Alec and those who followed him, dubbed Revankists, made an immediate impact in the fight. They didn't outright win battles initially, but Revan and his Revankists were able to narrowly win the Battle of Duro. This battle was key because it forced the Supreme Chancellor at the time to appoint Revan as the Supreme Commander. Revan's prowess as a general was astounding. The Republic went from being slaughtered to winning battles.
At the start, they were not much of a threat to speak of. But once the Jedi Revan took charge, things began to turn against us. The Republic fleets began to use more than just basic tactics. Feints, counterattacks, mass deceptions. Revan was a genius on the field.
Revan as a leader, however, was not like any other Jedi leader. Revan knew the risks of war, but also the advantages that could be taken by being ruthless. Much like a famous chess player in Bobby Fischer, Revan was willing to make sacrifices to end up ahead in the end. He would often sacrifice civilians or positional advantages if it was a net gain strategically. These were dubbed moral shortcuts by others. Revan, unlike other Jedi, was not bound by the typical Jedi morality. Definitely not the same morality. He had his own idea of what was moral. And here we saw inklings of what made Revan so unique. Revan at this point was maskless, but what drove Revan to don the mask was the slaughter at Cathar. The Mandalorian forces were in the process of slaughtering mass civilians and creating a near genocide at Cathar. A female Mandalorian pleaded with the Mandalorian leader Cassus Fett to not commit genocide. Cassus Fett didn't relent, however, and slaughtered the people, including the female Mandalorian. Revan, upon reaching Cathar, found the mask that this female Mandalorian wore and donned it, himself vowing for revenge against the Mandalorians. This marked the point where Revan no longer was who he was before. Instead, he became the character Revan, personified by the mask. This is how most of us remember Revan. At least visually, of course. We can all remember him wearing that really cool mask. But the mask itself meant far more than just a visual cue. The mask represented what Revan stood for. It represented the Republic and the Jedi vowing to stop the Mandalorian forces and their tyranny. In literature, we describe this as symbolism, or the mask having a symbolic meaning. Symbolism can make movements live far past the mortality of the creator. Biggest examples of this, of course, are observable in history with religion, the cross in Christianity, for example. Revan likely purposely knew that upon taking the mask, even if he were to die in the battle, his soul would live on, his message would live on, the mask would live on in the form of a symbol. Revan set himself up as a possible martyr if he were to fall in combat, not unlike a certain religious figure, Jesus, of course, in Christianity. Sometime during the Mandalorian War, before its conclusion, Revan and his apprentice Alec discovered what is dubbed the Star Maps. These were ancient forms of Rataka technology. Rataka were an ancient civilization that had essentially used their technological advantages to enslave the rest of the universe. These star maps allowed them to discover the Star Forge. The Star Forge was a sort of, forge that allowed them to create ships as well as droids. It allowed them to create an army. But although this device certainly would help Revan at a later stage, Revan at the time didn't really believe that it was important to use yet. It didn't particularly have an impact in the Mandalorian Wars. What did, however, was Revan discovering the planet Malachor V, which had an ancient Sith presence in the form of an abandoned temple. It is in this temple, Revan with the help of Kreia discovered the ancient Sith manuscripts. These manuscripts are what many believe led Revan to the dark side, and also led Kreia to adopt the beliefs that she did.
Be careful of charity and kindness, lest you do more harm with open hands than with a clenched fist.
It also turns out the last battle fought in the Mandalorian Wars would be on Malachor V. Through the help of one of his main generals, the Exile, or as we know her, Meetra Sutric, Revan was able to calm the Mandalorians into attacking Malachor, thinking that they had trapped the forces there.
It's a trap!
However, Meetra, with the help of Bao-Dur, her engineer, had the mass shadow generator in their back pocket. This essentially meant that they would suck everything into the planets, sort of like a gravity vortex. This would destroy the Mandalorian fleet, who were unable to flee, and it would also destroy some of those on the planet.
We all went through some tough times after Malachor, and maybe we all did a little forgetting.
It would be a great sacrifice and great blow to both of the Jedi and Republic forces, but it would also mark an end of the war. It was a calculated and necessary risk. As the trap was transpiring, Revan, who arrived late to the system, was challenged by Mandalore the Ultimate to single combat. This was because Mandalore knew that they were going to lose this battle, but he still wanted to get some sort of glory or honor back, which was very important in Mandalorian culture. It also meant that maybe they would have a chance to win, or at least win the respect of people. Revan would be victorious in this battle, and would then take the mask of Mandalore and hide it, essentially crippling the Mandalorian people without a leader, which forced them to live as petty thugs and mercenaries. This marked the end of the Mandalorian Wars, but just the beginning of a war of something far more sinister. I have to warn you guys though, it is at this point that things start to get a little bit murky. Drew Karpyshyn, the writer of KOTOR 1 as well as the book named Revan, wrote Revan's story far more than any other writer. However, KOTOR 2's writer Chris Avalon's idea of Revan is subtly different than that of Drew's. We have far more story to go off with Drew's interpretation, through the Revan book as well as the SWTOR MMO, which continued Revan's story, but there's a key difference here I wanted to outline in the video later on. Please note, I will not spend much time outlining the supposed history that accompanies Drew's later works in regards to Revan. Instead, I will continue the history portion based on the events of KOTOR 1 and KOTOR 2. To continue the story of Revan after the conclusion of the Mandalorian Wars, after the Mandalorians were defeated, Revan and Malak left to the Starforge. Seemingly out of nowhere to some, Revan and Alec assumed the roles of Darth Revan and Darth Malak, Dark Lords of the Sith. They traveled to the Starforge where they used it to create an armada, as well as recruited those Republic troops and Jedi who had followed Revan to war. This is the beginning of the Jedi Civil War, a war that almost led to the complete extinction of the Jedi. Through the use of the previously discovered Starforge, which essentially allowed them to create an innumerable amount of droids and ships, Revan and Malak wasted no time in attempting to eradicate Jedi through the use of Sith assassins. But the war wasn't just against Jedi, they also warred against the Republic. Darth Malak, unlike Revan, was far more concerned with the total eradication of the Republic, while Revan seemingly focused more on the Jedi. Malak orbitally bombarded numerous planets, and the Republic was nearly crippled from such. Revan disagreed with this type of motive. Malak accused Revan of being soft on the Republic, and this resulted in Revan slicing off Malak's jaw, and is the reason we have to thank for that cheesy laugh. Thanks, Revan. It's at this point that the Jedi Council concoct a plan, a desperate plan. Through the help of Bastila, they want to capture Revan and attempt to brainwash him into helping the Jedi again. Upon attacking Revan and Malak's ship, Malak, sensing an opportunity, fires on the ship, which leads to Revan being presumed dead when in actuality he was captured by Bastila.
I was part of the team sent to capture Revan, to capture you. When Malak fired on the ship, you were badly injured. We thought you were dead. Your mind was destroyed, but I used the Force to preserve the flicker of life in your body. I brought you to the Jedi Council. They were the ones who healed your damaged mind.
Malak assumes the role of the Dark Lord of the Sith now, and I'm not going to go into too much detail as to what happens after this because that's essentially the plot of KOTOR 1, and if you haven't played it yet, what are you waiting for? But long story short, Revan has no recollection of his previous memory, and essentially joins the Jedi again from the start. He recovers his lost memory, helps defeat Malak, falls in love with Bastila, and seemingly brings the Republic back from the brink of death. The Jedi Council after this are in a peculiar position. They don't necessarily support who Revan is, since he's very much an outlier and an outcast and disagrees with their traditional beliefs, but they also have to thank him for saving the galaxy. They attempt to coerce him and Bastila into possibly retraining, but both refuse. Bastila and Revan marry, which further estranges them from the Jedi Council. This is more of the same in Revan's life. He always felt like an outsider within the Jedi because of his ways of challenging beliefs, his thirst for knowledge. The Jedi Council served much like the Catholic Church. They had requirements and belief systems that they upheld. Revan was a bit of an oddity. He was not nearly as morally bound by codes, at least not the same codes that the traditional Jedi were bound by. He would even use dark side powers on occasion. He in many ways was a balance between the dark and light, at least that's how some saw it. It's upon this point that Revan remembers his previous memories about the Sith Lord Emperor who has to be stopped. He travels to the unknown regions, wanting to confront this said Emperor, and well, this is the beginning of KOTOR 2, starring the Exile, Revan's key general and friend. This is also the end of my reciting of Revan's history. Now you might be asking why I don't continue to recite Revan's history, as it does continue past this point, but that's because I don't think it's particularly well written past this point. Also because I don't really think it's helpful in analyzing his character and motivations. Revan sort of loses agency past this part of the story, at least to how he was written. If you're interested in this story, then I would suggest you read the Revan book, and if you're really interested, play SWTOR for Revan's final story. But if you are anything like me and appreciate what made Revan, well, Revan, you probably won't like either story interpretation. So let's pivot now to focusing more on Revan's characteristics as a person and what he stood for as a symbol. Before we break down his character though, an important point to make is that Revan indeed had different interpretations of who his character was. When Drew Karpyshyn wrote Revan in KOTOR 1, he had relatively little personality and was essentially just an extremely talented Jedi who fell to the dark side and then had his memory wiped and became a Jedi again. There wasn't much character development. This is primarily because you as the player played Revan. Contrast this with Chris Avellon's version in KOTOR 2, who was written far more philosophically because you had the advantage of Kreia being able to explain who and what Revan stood for. KOTOR 2 in many ways is still a story about Revan. Both games are very much about Revan. However, Karpyshyn had a chance to fix this issue, the issue that he created in terms of not having very much character to Revan in the first game, when he wrote a book titled Revan. A book of which could have helped explain what happened to Revan post-KOTOR 2 and lead into his involvement in the SWTOR MMO. I frankly don't know where to start with that book. Instead of hearing me rant about it, I would just go read it yourself or at least SparkNote it. It's not very good. My issues with Karpyshyn's Revan is he takes the complex topics such as morality and freedom of choice, things that Avellon's Revan, or interpretation of Revan, did fantastically, and makes them essentially as deep as a puddle. For example, according to Kreia, Revan didn't really fall to the dark side. Instead, he realized a large Sith threat was coming to destroy them, the Outer Rim and core planets most importantly, and he fell to the dark side to become a supreme ruler and try and unite the Republic against the said threat. It's obviously far more complicated than that and nuanced especially, but that's the beauty of it. There's so much extra detail. For example, was Revan really seduced by the manuscripts they found on Malachor? Is Revan a Grey Jedi and determined that for the greater good he had to destroy the Republic and then the Jedi and rebuild both of them? Was Revan ever truly evil? Or ever truly good? Maybe somewhere in between. We don't truly know based on the plot of KOTOR 2 and the details concerning Revan. What does Karpyshyn do to explain Revan in his moral dilemma, the dilemma brought up in both of these games? How does he answer all of those deep previous questions?
I have a bad feeling about this.
The Emperor Sith mind-controlled Revan. Yep, that's how he answers the questions. Effectively in one blow, Karpyshyn eliminates any plausible deniability, any moral ambiguity, and or character development associated with Revan's dark side journey, and chalks it up to him just being mind-controlled. If you can't see the error in this, I don't know where to start explaining it. Needless to say, it took an otherwise great character in Revan and reduced him to some cereal box character. You knew exactly what you were going to get. Sure, he tried in SWTOR to write things a bit more ambitious, but even those plots fall short as they are heavily reliant on the idea, Revan in this case, can't control himself. He loses all of his agency. So forgive me, but I prefer to focus on describing Revan the character as described in KOTOR 1 to KOTOR 2, and pretend all of that other stuff didn't happen. I refuse to believe that Revan's intrigue stops when he becomes mind-controlled. Tangent aside, let's focus on decoding Revan. Was Revan good or was Revan evil? His alignment is purposely left ambiguous. This is a key part of his character after all. Early in Revan's career before he became Revan, you should remember how his masters were weary about Revan in his early years. Revan's thirst for knowledge was something that scared his peers and teachers because the traditionalists in the Jedi Order were far more interested in upholding tradition versus making new discoveries. This is sort of my issue with religion as a whole in most cases. If you're confident in your beliefs being right, you shouldn't be afraid if someone is willing to challenge them. But for people on the Jedi Council, they most likely were traditionalists and wanted Revan to conform and stay in the box that they wanted to place him in. When you take a look at morality in media and literature, things are typically more traditionally defined. I think D&D, or Dungeons & Dragons, does a fantastic job of explaining morality through the 9 different alignments present in the universe. So, the SparkNotes version, you can click on the link in the description if you want to see more. But good implies altruism and protecting life, evil implies hurting or oppression, neutral people are committed to others by personal relationships and not some objective morality whether good or evil. Law implies honor, chaos implies freedom and flexibility, so for example, a lawful good character expectedly acts in a good or lawful/rule-abiding way, whereas a chaotic evil character impulsively acts evil. So where does Revan end up on this spectrum? Well, that's not an easy question to answer. This is why Revan is so fascinating. We don't know much about Revan's personality and day-to-day actions, but we certainly know his character based on his decisions and what he stood for. So we can rule out the evil alignments because Revan, no matter what, always followed what he believed in his heart, and in his belief, that was to protect those that he loved, and in turn the galaxy. Even when Revan was a Sith Lord, he only ever exercised brutality when prompted. He never sought out murder, and never sought out hurting innocents. Out of the neutral alignments, we know Revan was not neutrally evil because although he appreciated the teachings he learned from Kreia, a character I believe to be neutrally evil, he did not act in the same way as Kreia. They were very different, although maybe subtly in some cases. I think Revan is best suited as a chaotic good character, as he is a character who ignores tradition and law but still favors doing good. A chaotic good character is one who acts as his conscience directs him with little regard for what others expect of him. The interesting thing about this alignment is the fact that it is often where villains start. A chaotic good character is aware that they do things that could be morally questionable to others, but they don't deem them so, and what they deem good is ultimately paramount. The issues arise in what is considered good to this character. This could explain Revan falling to the dark side, if you indeed believe he did fall, at least non-intentionally. Revan certainly wasn't evil, at least not totally. This is easy to see when you compare him to another evil character such as Malak, who killed for the sake of killing at times. If force needed to be taken, Revan would be quick and ruthless. He didn't tolerate betrayal or disobedience, especially if someone got in the way of his goals. Revan worried about the overall picture and deemed losing battles not nearly as important as winning the war. Revan would sacrifice things if he knew that they would put him ahead.
Revan abandoned worlds of their defenders so that others would be too fortified to strike, and was willing to make sacrifices in order to advance goals. And in the end, Revan proved too much for us.
That really begs the question then, a question I know bugged me many hours as a youngling. Why did Revan fall to the dark side? Let's ask what Kreia thought when asked if Revan was Sith.
Already you presume much. You were there at Malachor. Revan's choices were always his own. It was not teaching or circumstance or example, it was him. Is that what he was? Or was he always true to himself, no matter what personality he wore? And there is something that the Council may never understand, that perhaps Revan never fell. The difference between a fall and a sacrifice is sometimes difficult, but I feel that Revan understood that difference more than anyone knew. The galaxy would have fallen if Revan had not gone to war. Perhaps he became the Dark Lord out of necessity, to prevent a greater evil.
What Kreia said is not unlike my assertion that Revan was chaotic good. A chaotic good character wouldn't have need for caring about what the Jedi Council thought. They would also be synonymous with being true to themselves. Kreia makes it a point to talk about that he was true to himself, which of course is a mark of a chaotic good character in Revan's character, but also mentioned that he was willing to make sacrifices if he believed that it would be positive for him, at least in the long run. The key part of Revan's morality is that it was fueled by passion. A passion to stop those that he loved from being harmed. But then why did Revan assume the role as Dark Lord and wage a war against the Republic and Jedi? I mean, he killed Jedi. He killed people in the Republic that wouldn't turn as well. Well, he did it to save the galaxy for the greater good. Yep, that's something a chaotic good character would say to excuse him of doing things that others could morally object to. The moral code of a chaotic good character is self-guided. Such a person doesn't obsess about what others would argue is morally right or wrong. When Revan went to the dark side, he rarely ever made decisions that actively weakened the Republic. The most aggressive thing he did towards the Republic on a large scale was assassinate key political figures. But I'm sure he could argue that these figures were likely either deemed weak or inefficient. The only time Revan killed someone who would have likely proved to be an asset was when he killed the General Usanus. This was due to Usanus challenging Revan to a single combat battle. Interestingly enough, Usanus was married to RNK, or as some suggest, Kreia. It's a bit interesting to see that even in the end, Kreia was still rather obsessed and saw Revan in this very romantic light, and I don't mean that in a wanting to be with him, but definitely romanticized him as a character, whereas he kind of killed her husband. Anyway, I digress. The only time the Sith ever aggressively conquered a planet under Revan's control was when Malak, against Revan's orders, bombarded Telos. Revan left the Republic intact while utilizing the Starforge to strengthen his fleet, as well as turning many previous Republic soldiers and fleets to his side. Now as for the war against the Jedi, this is where Revan was far more brutal. This is because Revan ultimately wanted to unravel what the Council had built and who they had trained as, these traditional Jedis, which Revan knew wouldn't really follow him. As his previous master Kreia had taught him, they had a warped way of looking at the Force. Revan utilized assassins to capture or kill these Jedi. When the Jedi were captured, they were converted to the dark side and utilized by Revan. Those who didn't bend the knee to Revan were dispatched of. Revan seemed to want absolute obedience. This is because he knew how serious the Sith Emperor and his army was as a threat. Revan needed total obedience from everyone in order to have a shot at stopping this Emperor.
He said there was a war coming, that it was waiting out in the unknown regions, in the dark, waiting for us to destroy each other.
He certainly went to extreme needs to achieve this, means that could indeed be seen as evil by some, but of course those close to him, Kreia, Canderous, which is Mandalore, and many believe that, well, Revan ultimately did this for the greater good.
I'm your man until the end, Revan, no matter how this plays out.
He knew that this threat was essentially somebody who had created a power or was powerful enough to be essentially immortal. Revan knew that this character, the Emperor, also had an immense army backing him. So in an incredibly meta decision, Revan knew that if he could unite the entire space, which the only way he could effectively do so was become this sort of tyrant, at least that's how he saw it, that was the only way to defeat the Emperor. But still a way that he seemed to think of as a morally right way to do it. I'm sure some would disagree, but alas, that's the interesting thing about his character. Revan transcended his past. He became Revan, the masked Force user who united both Jedi and Sith. The man who threw away the shackles placed on him by those who didn't understand him and his methods. Revan could inspire undying loyalty, even his enemies were in awe of him. Revan might be part of the Legends universe after Disney bought Star Wars, but hopefully we can continue to share his legacy and the great character that he is. Let's just try to forget anything post-KOTOR 2, at least for his and our own sakes.